Has anyone else ever experienced the disappointment of booting up an old game from childhood, a game you absolutely adored and poured countless hours into, only to realise it's aged horribly? Well, that was my experience with The Thing on PS2. Developed by now defunct Computer Artworks and published by both Universal Interactive's Black Label Games and Konami, The Thing was released in 2002 for PS2, Xbox, and Windows, and followed on from the events of the 1982 John Carpenter movie of the same name. The game was even endorsed by Carpenter himself, with the director lending his voice to a minor character in an uncredited role. The video game adaptation of The Thing was lauded at the time of its release for its thrilling story, innovative trust-fear tactics as the back of the cover so eloquently puts it. Did you just put your finger on me? That's bloody rude! And of course, its horrifying visuals and sound effects. And I won't deny I'm a little biased towards the game due to the fact its movie counterpart is one of my favourite horror films of all time. If you've never seen John Carpenter's The Thing, I urge you to do so, especially if you're a fan of practical effects and gory scenes. But the film is more than just an impressive showcase of visceral horror. The paranoia of not knowing who the titular monster has infected, the loneliness and isolation of the film's Antarctic setting, the fear of what will happen next? That's what made The Thing such a fantastic movie for me upon first watch, and even many viewings after. I mean, I must have seen it over a dozen times by now, and I still get uneasy during that blood test scene. Now, the last time I played through the game was probably 2003, maybe 2004. It's been a long time, that's for certain. And while I don't remember everything about the Thing video game, I do recall being utterly terrified out of my wits as I walked around every corner, gun at the ready, panicking at the thought of some hideous fleshy monster thing jumping out and maiming me, or even worse, one of my teammates turning into a thing beast themselves. Yep, this is without a doubt one of the scariest games I've ever played. Or at least it used to be. Unfortunately, it hasn't aged well at all. Now, it's important to mention that I didn't actually finish The Thing this time around, hence the title of this video. Admittedly, it's not a very long game to begin with, taking around 3.5 to 4 hours to complete if you know what to do, and I have played it through before and know more or less the gist of the story. However, I just couldn't get through The Thing this time around, with much swearing and multiple rage quits before I finally conceded and decided it wasn't worth my sanity to try and finish this game. To give a basic synopsis of the plot before we delve into the good, the bad and the ugly, however, and without spoiling too much for those who might want to play it after this review, the events of the Thing video game take place shortly after the ending of the film, with US Special Forces units being sent to Antarctica to investigate what exactly happened at the US and Norwegian research bases. You control Captain Blake, leader of Bravo Team, who's investigating the US base, whilst Alpha Team led by Captain Pierce checks out the Norwegian base. Nothing much happens during the first level, and it serves more to teach you the basics of movement and squad and item management, as well as remind you of the events of the film, with areas of interest being the ice cave down in the ravine and the dead body outside the base. It's only when you move on to the next level, where Blake travels to the Norwegian base to rendezvous with Alpha Team, that all hell breaks loose, as Blake and the remaining Special Forces realise what they're truly up against. Violent alien creatures with the ability to shapeshift and imitate other beings. From then on, things get much worse, with teammates falling out of trust with one another, people being infected left, right and centre. Oh, great.
Wait, he turned?
Yep. With all my shit! Oh no, he dropped it. Sweet. And the Thing beasts becoming steadily larger and much more terrifying. Now, the first thing you'll probably take note of when watching the opening cutscene, the graphics are slightly janky. They're not the worst graphics I've ever laid my eyes on, but they're certainly another reason why this game hasn't aged all too well over the years. Oh, and by the way, the characters here are supposed to be speaking Norwegian. Emphasis on supposed to be.
Larsen! Larsen! Oh, oh.
Now, of course, at the time of release, the graphics and cinematics of the thing were incredibly top-notch, featuring not only photorealistic characters and environments, but also artful cinematography to help set the atmosphere and tension. I should also point out that the graphics on the PS2 version here are probably the worst of the bunch. The PC and Xbox versions are far superior, albeit a bit of a mix, with better character models and overall sharpness on the PC, but much higher environmental texture quality on the Xbox. Credit to Arcade for showing the comparisons side by side, and if you want to check out the rest of his video comparing the three versions, there is a link to it in the description. There's no denying, however, that whatever version you play on, the characters of the thing look rather strange by today's standards. The thing beasts don't have to feel too bad about being labelled hideous or disturbing, given that's kind of the whole point, but the same can't be said for the human characters. As I mentioned, the developers actually used photorealistic faces for all the humans that appeared in the game, with lead coder, whose name I'm about to butcher, Diamid Campbell guy, stating, "We just photographed all the development team and then made models out of them, so the face textures are just modified versions of the photos we took." While this sounds like a great idea and it's a fast and easy method of creating realistic looking characters to fit into a realistic environment, it's kind of ruined by the fact that said characters don't move their mouths in a human way when speaking.
Keep your socks on.
Roger that.
Rat.
Look how he talks in his mouth.
Now, for its time, the thing had some seriously impressive mechanics that, to this day, I've yet to experience as fully in any other video game, with the biggest being the Squad Trust Fear system. You can find out how much a teammate trusts you or how terrified they are by using the squad menu. Let's start with the trust mechanic. Throughout your travels in Antarctica and the various bases dotted about the continent, you'll come across NPCs that can be brought along with you, if you can get them to trust Blake, that is. They come in three varieties: soldier, medic, and engineer, with soldiers being better in combat, medics able to heal both Blake and other teammates, and engineers required to fix the 43 million junction boxes that have fallen into disrepair. It's also important to note that NPCs you come across past the first level know about the things and how they can infect a human being, hence why it's vital to gain the trust of NPCs. Keeping them calm and above all alive also helps, especially if said NPC is necessary to progress further through the game. If you suddenly lose an engineer, for example, but you've still got a junction box that needs fixing, it's an instant game over. Sometimes the NPC isn't even necessary to progress, such as having a soldier with you, but because they're tied to a certain event in the game that drives the story along, their death can once again result in a game over. Oh, and by the way, at least on the PS2 version, there is no immediate load last checkpoint option if you fail. Instead, you have to go back to the main menu, just so you can choose to load up from where you last saved, which is another reason the thing can feel so clunky and dated to play.
What's the point in saving if you're not going to give me the option to load when I fail?
You should have just turned it off.
Anyway, back to the trust mechanic. All NPCs have multiple levels of trust, and most you first meet will be at the amber level, which means they won't trust you enough to follow your commands. This can rise to the green level once you've done something to gain their trust, to which they'll follow your commands, and then finally rise to 100%, which means they'll do whatever you say, no hesitation or questions asked. There are multiple ways to gain trust with an NPC, such as giving them weapons and ammo, healing them up, and even performing blood tests on Blake to prove he's not a thing.
Do you want this nice fire extinguisher I found?
Oh, I wonder if you'll actually accept that. Oh.
Wow, disappointing game.
However, you can end up losing all trust and dropping into the red if you mess up enough, such as by taking away a teammate's weapons and ammo.
Where's your weapon? You ain't got one, you're not special enough for a weapon.
Accidentally shooting them, and even ways I'd never even considered before, such as forcing an NPC who doesn't trust you to do a task by pointing a gun at them. Losing all trust will cause an NPC to shoot you on sight as they now believe you to be a thing. On to the fear mechanic, and once again this comes in multiple levels. If a teammate is feeling okay and perfectly fine in his surroundings, his portrait will be casually looking from left to right. If he's scared, he'll be looking around at a much more panicked speed, and if he's close to cracking up, he'll be shaking uncontrollably.
Let's see who's... there we go.
Do you think maybe it's him?
If an NPC reaches this final stage, you only have a limited amount of time to calm them down before they do something drastic, such as firing upon other teammates or even committing suicide. There are many elements and situations that can set off an NPC, and different types of NPCs can have varying levels of fear. Not everyone in your team will be losing the plot when coming across an eviscerated body, for example. How terrified they are will also affect how well their NPC handles his job. When under stress, a soldier's aim will be less accurate, a medic will be less likely to heal straight away, and engineers will take longer to repair junction boxes. In order to calm down a frightened NPC, you'll need to either give them more ammo, a shot of adrenaline, or simply move them away from whatever is bothering them.
Look, I'm alright. It's okay.
Are you
Are you alright,
alright, buddy?
buddy? You okay?
Are you okay?
Now, there's one other system at play in The Thing, which is also pretty unique to the game as far as I know, the infection system. However, whilst the trust-fear mechanics are fairly well implemented, the infection system is a bit iffy at times. The whole idea of it is based on the film. The teammates you find and pick up along the way have a chance to not only become infected by the various thing beasts roaming around, but they could already have been infected when you first found them, and they won't necessarily reveal themselves to be things straight off the bat. You can sometimes be travelling with a teammate for a good 20 minutes or more before they decide it's time to go fleshy and monstrous on you. It's an awesome way to pay homage to the film, whilst simultaneously bringing the paranoia that was so prevalent in the Thing movie to its video game adaptation. Unfortunately, if you're someone who's played through the game multiple times like me, you'll realise just how scripted these infection reveals are, rendering some of your abilities to counteract a sudden surprise infection useless. The system also doesn't make sense when you consider the actions you take and the limitations of the game, and even contradicts things that have been said in the film.
I know I'm human. And if you were all these things, then you'd just attack me right now. So some of you are still human.
For example, these two NPCs that happily accompany you throughout most of the second level turn out to be infected once you use the blood test sample on the soldier here, at Alpha Team Leader Pierce's request. And once Mr. Soldier changes, so too does Mr. Engineer. Okay, they could have been infected at any point leading up to finding Pierce, especially given how many waves of thing critters we fought off. But if we only tested the soldier, why would the engineer thing also reveal itself? It could have stayed in hiding and had the chance to infect more people. Heck, at one point I left both of them behind because they kept dying whilst I tried to retrieve the blood tests. Why didn't they attack and turn Pierce when I was gone? There's an even more egregious example that happened during my playthrough. I picked up this engineer dude during the Norwegian warehouse section, an NPC necessary to keep alive as I needed him to repair a junction box. Now this guy, like most NPCs I had on my team, was feckin' useless. Missing shots and wasting ammo, managing to run into the jaws of every rabid thing dog with gay abandon, and forcing me to use what few medipacks I had spare in order to keep him alive and not receive one of those dreaded game over screens. I was so fed up with this guy by the end of the warehouse section that Starsie and I both agreed to use a blood test kit on him once we found a save point. If he was really human, no biggie, we'll just reload and get the blood test kit back as they're quite rare and best used on Blake to reassure teammates. If he's a thing, then we can finally off the git. Turns out he was human, and rather than trying to sabotage me, he was just really bad at staying alive. But then, no fewer than 10 seconds later after reloading the game...
I can't believe you've done this.
What's the point of the blood test if the game's gonna go, well, he's gotta change here, see, because there's a boss coming up and you gotta fight it on your own. Sorry. Lead designer on the thing, Andrew Curtis, even described this situation as a big mistake, explaining that many players felt cheated as fellow soldiers tested moments earlier and proven genuinely human could suddenly sprout more tentacles than a Japanese restaurant and attack the player. Lead coder Campbell also stated, "The infection system was conceived as a simulation that had the capacity to play out differently each time you played the game, leading to potential replayability. However, the game was also very story-led with set pieces that required specific characters getting infected at certain times. These two aspects were constantly pulling in different directions. I think we ended up with a slightly messy compromise with good story elements and a genuinely new mechanic, but also some logical inconsistencies which, ironically, became glaringly obvious if you played the game more than once. And even if your teammates are genuinely human, and stay that way for a good long while, you're honestly better off on your own. These guys get stuck on doorways."
Wait, well, you've lost somebody.
You're having problems. "Refuse to follow you if even the slightest obstacle is in the way." Maybe it's because I haven't put the fire out. Are you serious?
I don't want to touch it, it burned me bum.
And somehow managed to miss every shot on the enemy, but turn poor Blake here into Swiss cheese.
Dude, look where you're aiming. There is an entire corridor you can aim in. Why are you shooting me?
And that's not accounting for the amount of times they dive in front of me when I'm trying to shoot.
Get out of the way, stupid. I can't shoot.
Speaking of which, I personally think another issue that dampens the experience of playing the thing is how prepared the characters of the game are compared to the characters of the film. If you've watched the movie, you'll know how vulnerable the US research team is. They don't have multiple weapons at their disposal, they don't even have a method of testing who is a thing until well past the hour mark of the film, by which point the team has already lost 6 out of 12 of its members through various means, if I've counted correctly. Now, it's understandable that a special forces unit would be well prepared with guns, grenades, medikits, all that jazz for whatever the situation may be. But herein lies the problem. By having these characters so well equipped for battle, it takes away the fear of coming across one of the things, and even ruins the paranoia of not knowing who on your team is truly human. I mean, why does it really matter when you can blow them away with your trusty shotgun the second they begin to turn? Anyway, you may be wondering at which point I finally threw in the towel. Remember the engineer I tested earlier? Remember how many bloody medikits he made me go through because he was too stupid to avoid the big scary monsters, and then he rubbed salt into the wound further by turning into a thing? Well, carrying on down this icy hallway will bring you to a room containing the first boss. A boss that not only hits you fairly hard if you get caught by one of its attacks, but can also smack you before you gain full control of Blake after the cutscene ends. Couple in the fact I only had 40% health to begin the fight with and not one medikit to spare. You can see why I decided not to continue with the thing on PS2. Without a doubt, this is one of the most unforgiving games I've ever played. Now, I don't mind a challenge, of course, and you're supposed to feel outnumbered and without a hope in hell when fighting off against these horrific creatures. But when the difficulty comes from unfair mechanics rather than truly challenging gameplay, like a random computer exploding as you enter a room that takes a chunk off your health,
Alien comes out. Like that alien from. Oh! What?
He did a little jump there.
What the fuck happened?
I don't know, something exploded.
Receiving a game over because a moronic teammate decided he wanted to cuddle up with the big chumpy things rather than kill them, and even boss areas offering no health top-up before encountering the big bads, you start to rapidly lose interest for this game. I didn't mention either, there are no difficulty settings for the thing. The only option you have is to choose easy, normal or hard auto-aiming, a setting that I personally found made no difference after I tried swapping to easy aiming in the hopes of killing this twathead faster. Needless to say, it didn't work. You know what the saddest thing of all is? I really, really wanted to enjoy this game again. I truly did. I wanted to be scared shitless like I was back in 2002. I wanted to feel the paranoia that made the film so memorable for me. I wanted to be reminded of why I played the thing as much as I bloody did as a kid. But instead of gawping at the visceral horror on display, panicking about what disgusting creature I'd come up against next, and pooping my pants at the distant roars faintly heard over the Antarctic winds, I was shaking my head at my inept teammates and their ridiculous AI, raging at the multiple deaths I endured on this extremely stupid boss fight, and cursing my sister for begging me in the first place to play the thing again, which ultimately soured the fond memories I had for this once beloved game. Oh well, at least we got a few laughs out of it.
If I could teabag right now. Oh my god.
Oh,
I'm all right. It's okay. I'll pull it together.
It's all right. I'm fine.
Guys, you are like fucking bipolar.
You didn't
What?
do
It
that.
left my shoes behind.
shout out to my biggest supporters, Klaxon, Thomas Hinton, Ray Zack, Mr. Zugador, Ross Ward, Poplio the Destroyer, Merendor, Trevor, James Townsend, Artemis the Falcon, Hayley Thomas, Chris Morris, and Ross Hextall.